We're going to go ahead and get started. You want to take a seat? Welcome to the what month is it? August Continuous Delivery Meetup Group. My name is Ashley Wilson. I'm the organizer of the group. I work at Sauce Labs. We do automated testing for mobile and web apps, and yeah, we're big into CI ourselves, and this group, as you guys know, is really about kind of the release and continuous delivery, continuous deployment. If you guys have not been to a meetup before, we've been meeting every couple of months. I would love to meet more often. I run another meetup group, the Selenium meetup group, that meets once a month because I have so many volunteers for speakers that we meet every month. So if anyone wants to speak about anything that you've learned, any challenges, any cool projects that you're working on, kind of related to this space, shoot me a note through the meetup group. We would love to have you. Everyone who speaks is themselves a developer and just like you, kind of learning, doing things. So don't be afraid if you'd like a nice opportunity to give a meetup talk. So yeah, are there any announcements? Anyone hiring?
Hi, I'm Carter Sanders from Okta. We're looking for a release coordinator. It's probably a less technical role than a release coordinator. Okta is on some sort of program management background.
Hi, my name is Boo. I work at AG. Welcome here. Thanks for very much for being here. We also looking for senior engineers, software engineers in tools and build. And just like my ex-boss at Netflix, that I worked together last time. And we navigate people. We want to provide framework so it allows you to push code themselves anytime. Anybody can push it. We believe this MeetUp because that's what we want. That's what our vision, fast and safely and peaceful. Anything what I add is my team, Mike and Braden, and we're looking for senior release engineers. And please come talk to us if you want to learn more about it.
Yeah, we should give a big thank you to Tagged for hosting us. And to Emily over here who set everything up, got the pizza, the great beer, and everything ready. So thank you. We appreciate it. Yeah, so, anything else?
I'm Adam from Other Labs. We're also hiring developers and QA and engineers as well. So if you're interested in Other Labs,
Cool. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Niall and Peter. They're going to be talking about Strider, an open source CI framework that they are developing. Yeah.
Hey everyone, yeah, so just to introduce ourselves, I'm Niall O'Higgins, and my co-founder Peter Braden. We started a small company called Frozen Ridge, and our main project and product at this time is an open source continuous deployment framework or platform called Strider. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what Strider is, how it compares to other continuous deployment or continuous integration frameworks, what our experiences are, and then Peter's going to really dive into how you can use it to do CD of front-end JavaScript specifically on multiple browser OS combinations and stuff like that using services like Sauce Labs. So he'll be kind of diving in more on the technical side. So just to sort of start off, people always ask us, well, what is this thing you're building? What is Strider? What's it about? So it's an open source continuous delivery platform, which is a little bit vague. So if we say it's similar to Travis CI or similar to Jenkins or even BuildBot, that probably makes a lot more sense. And what I'd say is, something that's important about it is that it's very much based on real-world experience. So we've been working in this field for a number of years on a consulting basis. We have a consulting company that does CI and deployment automation and so on. And so a lot of our work here comes out of consulting work in this field. And this is a screenshot of kind of what it looks like, which is, this is the dashboard. This is integrated directly with GitHub, so it's somewhat similar to Travis in terms of the UI. All right, so why did we build this thing? So I guess one of the things that you'll notice very quickly, even at a meetup like this, is that the definition of what continuous deployment or continuous delivery or continuous integration actually is varies greatly. And so to a lot of different people, they mean different things. So for example, some people might consider continuous deployment to mean full push to production when the tests are green. That's fine for some people. Like say, I think Etsy might be a prime example of that type of model. Plenty of other people consider it to mean push to staging or something like that. Then still you have, well, what if it's not a web application or it's not a SaaS app? What does continuous deployment of a mobile application mean? Or what does continuous deployment of a, some sort of, say, New Relic does continuous deployment of their agent software? Doesn't strictly fit into the same model. And the same thing with CI. People have different requirements with what they want tested and when. And not only that, then within organizations, software organizations, they can have vastly different processes, workflows. The scalability requirements can be extremely different. Say, for example, you might have one organization which is unit testing small Node.js applications, always on the latest version, a very simple type of a pipeline. Then you look at somewhere like Mozilla, which literally has thousands of build servers. It's a massive scale that they do, and they actually, scalability for them is a huge issue with their CI system. So these things vary greatly across organizations. Some are simpler, more complex than others. And that also complexity, what does testing your software mean? So again, if you're dealing primarily with server-side code, they're pretty standard, good approaches for doing, say, unit testing and integration testing of that type of back-end application. Then if you move to the front-end JavaScript testing, as I'm sure the Sauce Labs guys will tell you, it's a very complicated thing, because what does it mean when you say, oh, I want to do CI on my front-end JavaScript? Does it literally mean executing the JavaScript across 10 different browser OS combinations? Are you just going to fire up something like Phantom.js, a headless browser? Are you just going to run the stuff in a fake DOM in Node or something like that? And again, with mobile, you have the same types of things where you have all these different Android versions, you have multiple iOS versions, more limited set of devices, and so on. So we found that in the real world, people need a lot of customization of their CI system, and so instead of trying to force a model on people, we instead built something that the core of it is extensible. So we just go to, these are the three core goals or key goals of our project with Strider. And so the first goal is in answer to that point. We think that the CI or deployment process It's more like a code editor. It's more that class of product than an email client or an app that you have on your phone where one size fits all. Um, People love to customize their editors. Also, deployment tools, like there's a gentleman from Puppet here. Again, all the best deployment tools are all open source. Um, so, we think open source is the way to go. And we've tried to take that a step further by making, extensions a first-class thing. We're also think that it should be as easy to use as possible. So we think that, user experience is important, same defaults are important, stuff like that. And finally, we wanted it to be easy to host. So there are some great solutions out there for people who just want to use a hosted service. So say, for example, Travis is great for that, for example, if you just want them to host it for you. That's wonderful. But a lot of organizations, because of these complex requirements they have, want to host it themselves on their own infrastructure, or they have security or other concerns where they really want to run it themselves. And we're kind of making we put a lot of work into making our particular tool very easy to run on your own hardware, on your own network, whatever, and we'll also provide support for it. So this customization thing, kind of making a big deal out of it, what does that actually look like? Other CI systems are customizable. Say, for example, Jenkins is well known for being very customizable. Well, if you're familiar with Node, and I presume a bunch of people probably here do, but Node, one of the great things about Node is it has a really amazing packaging system called NPM. And if you haven't used it, if you're familiar, say I personally come from a Python background. Python has virtual env and it has pip. Ruby has, I forget whatever Ruby has, the gem system. And they're okay. Perl has CPAN. Node's packaging system is really amazing. And so we've simply made our Strider extensions be Node modules. So they're just like any other Node module you might download and install. It uses the same tooling. And we've made our extensions first class, which means that absolutely everything within the system is customizable. From the front end template code, if you want to brand your CI system so that it can look completely branded to your organization, you want custom dashboards, whatever you want built, you can do that with Strider very easily. You can also extend the back-end side quite easily. So for example, we have an ocean of worker extensions. So say, for example, if you're not happy to run your jobs on the same box, you can implement your own distributed network worker. We fully support that. We have our own using 0MQ, works great. And it also allows you to quite easily integrate with third-party services in particular, like say, for example, with Sauce Labs or Heroku or these other cloud services that you might want to use. We have a bunch of existing open source plugins. Here are just some examples. We have one which makes it easy to use Sauce, Python, Go, Node.js support, QUnit support, Jasmine support, run custom scripts, and on, and they're pretty easy to write. So that's one big focus of ours. So if you're not happy with a one-size-fits-all model, you can try our stuff out. We try to be easy to use in the sense of user experience. Like I think Travis is a very good example of a tool that's extremely popular with developers because it's so easy to get your project going under CI with Travis. And we try to have a similar, that's what we aim to have, a similar level of user experience. Our UI isn't identical, but we integrate directly with GitHub. You have a list of repositories. You can just you just turn them on and off, whether you want deployment or CI or whatever. We make an effort to auto-detect the nature of your project or your repo as much as possible. So for example, we're pretty good if we find a package.json file in your repo, we know that it's Node.js. We know automatically how to run your tests, how to install dependencies. We can do the same thing for Python, Go. We can do it for Ruby, all that sort of stuff. So we try to be good there. And then we try to make everything configurable through both the web UI and through config files. So we're not exactly where we want to be yet with the configuration, but we're hoping this will be, you can do everything you want through the web, and you can also just drop a config file into your repo if you so wish. So that's an emphasis. We have put a lot of effort into making this easy to host. You can install it on your system with one command, npm install -g strider, if you have Node installed. The only dependency of Strider is MongoDB, so you can either run your own MongoDB, or we work fine with one of the cloud-hosted providers, like you can use a free database from someone like MongoLab or MongoHQ, and that works great for your local machine. We also, on Friday, we had a very popular blog post, which is a Docker image. If you guys are familiar with Docker, it's a recent project for lightweight Linux containers. The website's docker.io. And so we have a full, it's like a VirtualBox image or something like that, equivalent, but it's much lighter weight. So once you install Docker on your machine, you can type this command, docker pull strider /strider, and that will actually pull down an image which includes Strider and all its dependencies, build tools, and an existing running MongoDB. So you don't have to do anything. This thing will just come up, you can log into it, and you're running. That's all you have to do. It's in a container already. So this makes it easy to do private on-premise deployments. You can use your own infrastructure if you have machines, or we've successfully deployed it to platform as a service like Heroku or .cloud. We're working on a hosted service, really for convenience. If you're interested in something like that, you can sign up our website. And we're also offering commercial support for this thing if you need it. But it's all open source. You can make any changes you want yourself. So that's what I've got to say about the intro to Strider and kind of what we're about. And now I'm going to hand you over to Peter, who's going to talk specifically about his work on the front end stuff. So thanks.
All right, so I thought now Niall's introduced. Oh, sweet. Which button is it? It's on the bottom. Good. So I thought now Niall's introduced Strider. I'd talk about a specific problem and solution that we came up with recently. I mean, I know that a lot of you guys do this for a living, so it's fun to share war stories. Unfortunately, we're still kind of on the NDA, so we'll be a little bit vague about the problem we're solving. This is kind of my vague description of what the problem is. So we had a client that wanted to, what can I say here? They wanted to test a bunch of different repositories with very different front-end frameworks, testing frameworks. So there was one in QUnit, for example, one in Jasmine. One with the Dojo test framework. I don't know if you work with that. And the sort of the main caveat was that we didn't have any control over any of the source code, any of the way that they had their tests set up. We didn't have access to any of the repos. We just had to get the tests running in Strider and reporting the results back so that we could tell if it passed or failed, and how many, for example, without any control over anything else. So, I mean, this is a fairly common thing, I guess, that you, as a tester, have to set up a system without having a lot of control over what is being written in terms of the tests, especially for us as consultants. This is something that happens. So we spent a bunch of time talking it over, and one of the things that came to mind was a project by Adam Christian over at Sauce Labs. A while ago, he wrote this thing called Jellyfish. Website. So Jellyfish allows you to write JavaScript and have it run anywhere. So essentially what that means is you can write some JavaScript and have it injected on any web page. It doesn't have to be a web page you control. It can be a web page that you don't even have access to the server of. You could run JavaScript on Google if you wanted. So basically, what this means is that you can write arbitrary JavaScript to test a page. This is not Selenium, not WebDriver. You're actually writing JavaScript which is executed on the page. This is pretty rad because it would get us to sort of 90% of the solution. So if we had a QUnit test suite, for example, we would only have to write a QUnit extension to monitor the state of the tests as they get run, and report back with Ajax to Strider sort of as they pass, as they fail, as the suite completes, for example. And basically, the way that Jellyfish works, it creates a proxy. Actually, wait. Oh, no. Getting ahead of myself. I have a diagram later on where I'll go through this. But basically, it creates a web proxy. So every request that goes through the proxy, it goes to the web page, comes back, and if it's an HTML request, it will find the end, or it can actually find anywhere on the page, but by default it finds the closing tag of the HTML, and it will just inject a little script tag before then to a script that it serves itself, which can be whatever you want. So this is pretty awesome because it means you can essentially, so what Jellyfish actually does is it will handle a bunch more. It will like launch the browser or whatever, and it will let you just type have the JavaScript in a file, and it will run away, execute that, come back. That was a little bit more functionality than we needed. So I broke out the proxy code into its own repository, which is this one here. Essentially, this is the exact code that's in Jellyfish. Ideally, one day we'll be able to just have Jellyfish require this module rather than having the duplication of the code. But this is just the code that does the proxying. So we didn't need any of the browser stuff, for example. We just wanted the proxy stuff so we could interface with Strider. So it does exactly what I described. I'm going to go to the diagram now. It's kind of a crazy, messy diagram, but it's kind of a crazy, messy system, so I guess you get what you do. So essentially, I'll walk you through. So basically, what we wanted to do was add this custom JavaScript shim to any page. So this is the Jelly proxy that I was talking about, which is what I called the proxy part of Jellyfish. So this is your site that you want to test. Essentially, for the purpose of our example, this is the test runner of various repos. So there's one in Qunit, one in Jasmine, for example. So we can write a little bit of JavaScript that would be injected on any of those test runner pages to do the reporting back. So, got lost in the arrows here. Yeah, so basically what happens is your browser requests a page from your site. It injects this JavaScript shim, so your browser is now running this code. We actually use Sauce Labs because we didn't want to run any of these browsers. We had a lot of operating systems browser combinations to test. And so what happens is that our JavaScript shim contains a very small Ajax wrapper, so we can talk back via this predefined to Strider with whether tests are passing or failing. And I wrote another module that really wraps all of this pretty nicely, so that there isn't a whole lot to do. So one of the little caveats that we hit was we were running a bunch of different browser and operating system combinations, and we didn't want to run multiple proxy servers. So how do we identify which browser and which operating system are reporting back at a time? So one of the little things that I added to the Strider Jelly module was you could pass, as part of the URL segment, an identifier for whatever the browser or operating system combination was that was running that particular test, so that when it would report back, that would be an identifier that was passed along. So by doing that, we could work out what was passing, what was failing. And basically, it's stripped out before it even gets to your site, so it's kind of transparent in terms of what is being passed along to the thing under test. So that's about all. So this is the wrapper for Strider that wraps all this nicely. So you don't actually have to require Jellyfish or the Jelly proxy yourself. If you just have a Strider install, it's as simple as installing this plugin, and you get the ability to add any JavaScript to any page that you want to test. And so basically this allowed us to get reporting back from a variety of different test runners, Qunit, Jasmine, the Dojo one, a variety of them that I forget right now. So I just wanted to sort of talk about this as sort of something that has a lot of potential. I think that, you know, for front-end testing, because there's such a variety of different ways of testing, being able to run RPG JavaScript really opens up the possibilities for, you know, whatever you want to do in terms of, you know, finding out what's on the page, integration testing, even like unit testing with a live site potentially. Yeah, so that's essentially all I've got now. I guess at this point, should we do some questions?
Yeah, if anyone has questions, I guess, about this stuff or CI or CD in general, or what we've been doing with kind of JavaScript testing specifically. So the question was, how do we compare Strider with Jenkins? Well, I guess it's an interesting question. I mean, Strider is a much newer, lighter weight tool. For example, I guess Jenkins is, you know, several years old at this point, certainly. It's written in Java. It's been around for a long time. It's extremely powerful and has a huge ecosystem. But, you know, we've kind of built our thing from the ground up for our own purposes. So, I mean, you know, we're hoping that anything you can do with Jenkins, you can do with our system. But, I mean, well, the differences would be, you know, we try to power the same workflow, I suppose, in that, you know, we detect changes in version control, and then we run tests and report the results. So from a workflow perspective, we support roughly the same workflow, but other than that, it's completely different software.
I think one of the key differences, before we take the next question, is Jenkins is in Java, so everything you do is in sort of Java mindset. You know, write extensions, you have to write in Java. We thought that is something that tends to be less popular nowadays. JavaScript is a language that kind of everyone knows, or everyone at least has some experience with. So by making everything in JavaScript, this is sort of a lower barrier entry to customizing. Writing a Jenkins customization is kind of, you know, unless you have that experience with Java, a difficult barrier to entry, whereas we think that really writing an extension with Strider, which is something we're trying to keep as simple as possible, it really opens up the potential for people to do the customizations themselves.
Yeah, so say for example, I mean, all of this work that Peter has just presented on is its own plugin, for example. So there's a Strider Jelly plugin which you can install, and then you'll just be able to do this type of JavaScript injection and front-end testing across multiple browsers or whatever. We have other plugins which completely customize the front end, which I think, I'm not sure if Jenkins can do this actually, where the entire front end of the application is skinned however you want it. So, you know, we have developed for some customers, you know, completely branded dashboards which don't look anything like the Strider that we have in these screenshots. And for testing, again, it's completely customizable.
We have, for example, there's a Strider QUnit plugin. So if you want to do QUnit tests for your front end, there's a plugin that will just do that out of the box. You just point at the early, you know, the QUnit running Earl, and it will just, you know, report back with all those results. So it's as simple as installing that one plugin to do the QUnit tests. There's another one for, you know, Python. You know, there's also all sorts of these plugins that are specific to running your tests, and writing them is incredibly simple. At the moment, so this is actually something that's on our roadmap. At the moment, we only use GitHub, which is a severe limitation. We're aware of this. We're actually working on being able to support other version control systems, other version control hosts. So if you want to, you know, do your own VA, use GitHub Enterprise, for example, or, you know, Mercurial, Bitbucket, any of that. It's on our roadmap. We just haven't got to that point yet. It's tied into GitHub, but definitely something we're working on actively.
Another question.
So one of the gaps in Jenkins right now is there's really not a clean, easy to visualize pipeline management system. Does StriderCD offer anything along those lines?
So the question was just about the lack of a pipeline visualization, I guess. A good one for that, it's lacking in Jenkins, and does Strider provide anything like that? I mean, at the moment, our pipeline we have logical notions of prepare, test, deploy, and cleanup. So those are the kind of workflow stages that we support. And in terms of visualization, we support those. But we're not like something like, I'm familiar with a little bit with, say, ThoughtWorks Go, for example, which provides, they put a lot of effort into that type of stuff. And we haven't gone, quite that far yet. But again, in theory, we see that as something that could be provided through plugins where you have your own view on this stuff. So we don't have anything out of the box that supports that, but it's totally possible.
It's interesting to talk about. I was actually working on, so we're doing a major sort of overhaul at the moment of the way that we order plugins, for example. So I'm working on it at the moment. It's a live areas in a branch, having it so that you can sort of drag and drop plugins into the order that you want to go. So there is these three phases. There's a prepare phase, a test phase, and a plugin phase. We have on a cleanup phase before. And with each of those phases, each plugin gets to determine an action. So I'm working on something so it's literally drag and drop to work out what happens first. I don't know if that gets part of the way to having sort of the pipeline visualization that you're thinking of, but that's something I think that we're definitely working on, and that's an area that we want to do.
Great. Yeah. Any other questions about CI or deployment or
Anything?
Well, that's kind of some of the stuff that we were doing with this this particular project, for example, is sort of like that, where all the browsers that are doing the tests are running, in Sauce Labs' cloud somewhere completely different, and then they're talking over a secure tunnel to our server, and so there's like 3 or 4 different servers involved in that whole process. Oh, inter-project dependency. I guess that's something, inter-project dependency is not something we've particularly dealt with right now. So again, that's something that we're thinking about, but for a lot of what we've been doing, it tends to be a single, again, this comes down to kind of code organization and stuff like that, which is a lot of people will have one particular service that they want to test in a single repo, and then the deployment actions, which might depend on other things, will that'll be part of the deploy phase. So we haven't currently got the point where builds trigger one another, which I think is a pretty common Jenkins abstraction, I guess, the Jenkins way of doing this, where we would see that more as, you have these different plugins that are on a per repo.
I think it would be possible to do that in a plugin.
Yeah.
You could write a plugin that would, if something passed, would tick off another build. I mean, it's an API. It's not something we have built in, but it would be possible to do that.
Well, if you're familiar with JavaScript, we'd like to think it's pretty easy.
I think it would be pretty easy.
I mean, I guess these modules that we're talking about, if you want to look at existing plugins and sort of see what's involved, if you look at some of these plugins are, they could be 20
I mean, if
lines
this is
long.
something you actually want to talk over, we have an IRC channel. I think it's probably the best way to get hold of this. So it's StriderCD.
Strider and Freenode, yeah.
So pop in there. We'd love to talk this over. It sounds like something that wouldn't be too hard to do with a plugin. Yeah, absolutely.
Possible, let's say my tests all pass, it's all good, it's being rolled. Is it possible to actually have Strider hold on to the code artifacts and have a station to work on? So not in the sense of like you can push it, but like hold it and ask me, there's a big red button that I want to push me
Yeah, so that sounds like the kind of where you want a manual phase before pushing anything live. So it's like, okay, maybe it deploys automatically to staging, and then there's a manual push from staging to production. It's a pretty common workflow that people want. So you can, there's no reason you can't do this with the system as it is. We haven't got we don't have that pipeline in the UI. So say, for example, that's something that I think ThoughtWorks Go will have, where you'll be able to specify these UI stages, and it'll be very visual. But there's no reason you can't do that. mean, it's just not heavily emphasized in the UI. It's something we'll probably emphasize more. Another thing we're very Git-based at the moment, and I think we intend to stay Git-based. Say, for example, if people are using the Git flow workflow, that's something that can work well for that, where there's a specific branch. When that branch is pushed to, then that should go to production, or mapping separate branches to different environments, which is kind of a similar thing.
Also, depending on what your build artifact is, I mean, if you're sort of building, a binary as part of one of the steps, one of the extensions that is built in is you can run an arbitrary custom Unix script as any part of as any one of the four phases. So as your deploy phase, rather than actually deploying it, you could just write a script that tarballs that up and send it to whatever server you want. That would be very easy to do. Yeah, I guess depending on what those build artifacts, there's a lot of possibilities that would be available to you. Sure.
So, currently the whole JavaScript world and building doing some front-end testing, NPM is definitely very interesting, but I'm wondering, does the Strider provide any sort of tool to actually use NPM, or do you have to kind of bake that into your JavaScript? Hey, I'm going to use modules for NPM,
So,
I'm thinking of maybe on kind of the explicit declare what you need in that file.
So, okay, yeah, I think, so the question is, does Strider do anything specific with NPM in terms of declaring your dependencies and so on for your project? Well, I guess, I mean, at the most basic level, any directory with a package.json file in it is an NPM module, essentially. So if you're talking about doing this on something that's under CI, like a project of yours that you want NPM to be able to understand in some way, just by putting a package.json file there, Strider will know how to interface with it. So if you're talking about a repository that's under test in Strider, the answer is yes. That we support package.json, which is the native kind of node way of interfacing with NPM.
Package.json, you can specify the actual versions of dependencies, for example. So it's kind of the different, like similar to the POM file. That's where you would log down your dependency tree.
Yeah. So hopefully that answers the question.
Anyone else? Anything, not even CI. Actually, that's very interesting you ask. One of our partners is Nojitsu, and they just recently announced a way to have a private NPM internally, so you can sort of specify your own internal packages, for example. I'd be happy to introduce you to those guys if that's something that you guys need. Yeah. No, that's definitely something that it's like for enterprises, and it's exactly one of the things they try to address with this. So, yeah.
That's a really good question, and we're kind of aware of this again. I alluded to it with, we know that Mozilla has this massive Jenkins cluster, and they just have huge scalability issues. And so the question was around: do we support network distribution of jobs with master slaves? Can you auto scale things like that? So that's not something that we've really had to deal with very much yet. Like, we haven't had to deal with scalability of actual builds has not been our concern. Other than for, this type of JavaScript testing where we're able to leverage someone else's cloud to do that, so we don't need to spin up, Windows VMs to test Windows browsers, for example. We effectively outsource that to Sauce, and we integrate with them to do that. We do have a network worker, which we've used for some of our own stuff, and I think we're kind of working on an open source version of that, which will kind of provide that capability, basically. But it's not something that's there right now. Again, at the moment, we're more catering towards people without those scalability requirements. But it's totally, the plugin system was built with that in mind. So we'll get there.
To give you a little bit more visibility into sort of the status of what that is, we have a network worker, but that's just using Linux containers at the moment. We're actually sort of in active development of, like you say, a network worker using Docker. So the idea is that you'll be able to run a Docker image wherever makes sense, and your tests will be run inside that Docker container. So that could be on the same machine or a remote machine, so it's sort of a slave scenario. And we also kind of want it to be, you can specify the root image. I don't know how familiar you are with Docker, but it allows you to specify a sort of a root image of what that container state is. So we want you to be able to specify what environment your tests are running, for example, which is kind of agnostic to where it runs. So like doing this over the network is entirely sort of what we envisage this happening. So absolutely, we're working on getting this right now. It's kind of early stages in terms of coding it, but something is on the roadmap.
All right. Anything else? All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for listening to our talk. And yeah, if you'd like to talk to us or you're interested at all, we're on IRC, on Freenode, and Channel Strider, and please drop by, ask any questions or whatever. We'd love to get your feedback.
Also, we're just a corporate shill at the end. We run this consulting company. If you do need, consultancy in any of these areas that we've talked about, or I guess any node or Mongo or anything like that in general, hit us up. We're happy to talk.
Thank you very much.